It's a story of sex and greed. It's lies, it's love, it's hate, it's evil, it's good. There are heroes in it, there are villains in it.
The matricide, it happens very, very seldom.
She heard a shot, and she heard a scream, and she heard a thud, like someone falling to the floor.
His account was, my mother shot herself. She may have shot herself accidentally. It may have been deliberate.
Why did he not say, look, Mum, that gun's loaded, it's dangerous?
Here's this poor woman. She's done everything she can for her son. She ends up shot in the head and about to be jailed.
Didn't give a fig for discipline. He didn't respect authority, but what he did demand was the respect of the big man.
Police investigation was nothing more than a shambles. And I think he was very fortunate in having a very flawed police investigation behind him.
There must have been hundreds of women that he seduced and made use of in one way or another. But some of them stuck. It looks as if he had a fondness for young women, girls really.
Nowadays, money, it would amount to about £1 million. They had a great time spending that. It was motorboats and fast cars and what have you, and touring Europe.
He had no qualms, no conscience at all.
It's got everything you could possibly want. If you were a crime novelist looking for a plot, this is the plot to end all plots.
A single gunshot in a forest near the River Rhine, ending the life of a man whose story is so hard to believe it might have been created by a crime writer. Even then though, this would be a writer with an overactive imagination. Smuggling, theft, gun running, forgery, and triple murder. For almost 30 years, Donald Merritt operated as a ruthless career criminal, and most astonishing of all, he got away with it. On the 8th of February 1927, Donald Merritt was led from Edinburgh High Court to begin a 12-month sentence for forgery. A charge of murder had been found not proven. Merritt was already well on the road to a career of sordid crime, not least because the killing for which he had just stood trial was that of his mother. He was aged 18.
Had the prosecution case been presented more clearly, more concisely, more easily understood by the jury, that verdict would certainly have been different. Merritt would have been put away for a lot of years. As a result of that not proven verdict, 2 more lives were lost. A lot of heartache followed, a lot of wrongdoing.
Merritt would go down in history as one of the most colourful and daring criminals of his day. His mother had doted on him. Did he really repay her by murdering her? Things might have been very different for a boy who could not have wished for a better start in life. His early childhood was spent in New Zealand, where his English father John was a successful electrical engineer. John Donald Merritt was born in North Island in 1908.
He was clearly from a fairly wealthy middle-class background because his parents met on a cruise to Egypt. So there was money on both sides. She was from Southport. She was the daughter of a wine importer.
Bertha Merritt was described as cultured and capable.
He was an only child. She'd had him late in life. She thought the world of him. He could do no wrong.
During World War I, Merritt Sr.'s engineering work took him to Russia. Bertha did not think the climate there was good for her young son, and she brought him back to Britain. He never saw his father again.
Her husband had disappeared at some point during the Russian Revolution. She thought he was dead. Others thought he was living in India. However, she was left to bring up her son on her own.
As the Great War raged, Bertha took a job with the Ministry of Food. She even came up with her own invention, the Merritt self-cooker.
Sales of this self-cooker went very well. Bertha obviously benefited from the royalties from that.
And young Donald was proving to be more than capable himself.
It's quite clear that he was extremely bright. I would have thought he would have a very high IQ. He had a great command of languages.
Wanting the best education for her son, Bertha sent him to Malvern College in Worcestershire. There were strict rules about behaviour, but the schoolboy broke every one in the book.
He seduced a number of local girls. He committed the cardinal rule of being caught in bed with one of them and was kicked out of Malvern College. Bertha knew she had to keep an eye on her son.
Around Christmas 1925, mother and son moved to Edinburgh. By the new year, dear Donnie, as she called him, was enrolled at the university's Faculty of Arts. Bertha told her friends that her clever boy was destined for a career with the diplomatic service.
She was a very fond, very doting mother who tried to do everything she could right for her son. Wanted him to have the best education, to have money, to have a future.
For a time, the Merritts lived in a boarding house, but they had their sights on much better, and Bertha could afford it.
She wasn't a lady of work, she didn't require to work, and she had an income of £700 a year from some kind of trust fund. That would equate to about £15,000 nowadays, allowing him 10 shillings a week, or 50p in our up-to-date parlance of pocket money. And she made him keep an account book of how he spent his 10 shillings a week. But she was very meticulous about her spending and careful about it, and what she would do was, whenever she wrote a cheque for a certain amount, she would write that onto the cheque counterfile and subtract it from the previous total that she'd had in the account.
Bertha eventually found her ideal home here on Buckingham Terrace, one of the city's most respectable addresses. Donnie was greatly enjoying Edinburgh, but he preferred its less genteel side. As well as the regular allowance from his mother, Merritt knew he was due to inherit a substantial amount of money as soon as he turned 21.
The money would come from his grandfather, who had been a very successful Lancashire businessman, and Donnie was in line to inherit £50,000. That might not seem an awful lot nowadays, but in those days it was. The equivalent now would be in excess of £1.5 million.
Bertha had one brother, but he had been confined to an asylum in England. This meant that Donald would inherit his grandfather's sizable fortune instead.
Imagine it. You're a young man, you're 17, you know that in 4 years' time you are going to be a millionaire. All he had to do was to sit down, study, behave himself. He couldn't do that.
Merritt may have been brighter than average, but he had no appetite for study. While Bertha boasted constantly to her friends of her son's hard work and ambition, the truth was that young Donnie rarely opened a book.
They came, lived in Buckingham Terrace in Edinburgh, and he gained entry to the university. However, he failed to attend. In fact, it may be that he never attended even a single lecture. What he did do, however, was to go on the town.
Donald was lashing out money right, left and centre. Just imagine, he's a young man, he's been all over the world, he's well-travelled, he's knowledgeable, he's personable, and the other people there did like him. They found him very interesting.
In Merritt's day, Edinburgh's new town was popular with late-night drinkers and young people going to the dance halls. It was the height of the Roaring '20s. The Great Depression was still a long way off, and Merritt was making the most of it. The exotically named Dunedin Palais de Danse at Picardy Place was his favourite haunt.
For sixpence, you could have a dance with a woman who was described formally as a dancing instructress. Really, nowadays, we'd call them escorts.
He would pay the young women there who were hostesses to be with him all day, sometimes do with them for 24 hours. And I strongly suspect, although we don't actually know, that these young women were prostitutes as well as being hostesses and dance instructresses.
Merritt excelled at pulling the wool over his mother's eyes so that he could come and go around Edinburgh just as he pleased.
He wasn't in very much at night either, because he claimed that he used to sleepwalk. And so he had a rope tied across the front window to stop him going out. But instead what he did with it was use the rope to climb down from the first floor flat where they lived, so he could get down and go to the Palais de Danse.
He boasted to women about his wealth and connections with the underworld. His favourite instructress at the Palais de Danse was called Betty Christie. They began to spend more and more time together.
He was personally very charismatic. People like him very often are extremely at ease, life and soul of the party, very attractive. They build up a circle around them that very often are quite loyal to them.
Merritt showered Betty Christie with gifts. He bought a motorbike and started gambling, but the money he was squandering was stolen.
He was getting piles of his mother's blank cheques, he was putting carbon paper in between them, he was writing her signature, and he was then going over the signature in pen. He would take these to the bank, cash them. The bank thought they were absolutely genuine.
Young Donnie made sure to pick up the post every day, giving him the perfect opportunity to intercept his mother's mail.
He was very cunning in what he would do, because he would remove cheques from the front and the back of the book so that it wouldn't be noticed by his mother, and he would also tear out the counterfoils. And then he would write cheques to himself.
By March 1926, Merritt's spending was out of control. He was drinking and gambling heavily, though his mother seems to have remained unaware of his activities. The morning of the 17th began like every other. But was Bertha Merritt aware that a month before, her 17-year-old son had bought an automatic pistol?
The question is, why did he buy that gun? Did he buy it just to impress Betty Christie? He certainly showed it to her. Or was there another motive for it?
By this time, Mrs. Merritt employed a maid, 29-year-old Rita Sutherland. She attended the house at Buckingham Terrace each morning at 9. That day, Bertha was planning to write a letter to a friend. The maid, Sutherland, arrived as usual and began her work.
The Merritts had just finished breakfast, so she cleared away the table for them, took the dishes through to the kitchen for washing, and when she was leaving, she saw Mrs. Merritt was getting out writing stuff like paper and pen and ink from a bureau that was beside the table that they used as a dining table.
Was Donald realising that at some stage all the deviousness he displayed in forging cheques, draining his mother's bank account, was going to come out? What was she likely to do?
Bertha had recently received a letter from the bank telling her that her account was overdrawn. On that occasion, Donnie had failed to intercept the post in time.
To find out that she was in the red must have come as a horrendous shock to her. She amended that by topping up the bank account, but on the 17th of March, she received another letter from her bank, the Clydesdale, once again saying, "You are overdrawn." This must have upset her. Probably she challenged Donald, but we don't know.
On the 17th of March 1926, things came to a head quite suddenly and unexpectedly, I suppose. The household was going on as normal, but there must have been some words between Mrs. Merritt and her son.
After breakfast, Donnie fetched his study books and returned to the dining room.
The servant lady, after washing the dishes, came back to the parlour to do the fire, light the fire. But she found that both the mother and the son were working away there. The mother was writing a letter, and the son had his books over on the other side of the room, and he was apparently reading. So she went back down to the kitchen.
As far as what happened next, Rita Sutherland's testimony was to change more than once. One version of events seemed quite clear to her at first.
She heard a shot, and she heard a scream, and she heard a thud, like someone falling to the floor.
In the dining room, Donnie was standing by his mother, who was lying unconscious, her chair overturned and her head bleeding.
There was in fact blood flowing very heavily from a bullet wound behind her right ear.
Donald Merrett, the son, told her that his mother had just shot herself. And Mrs. Sutherland said to him, in fact, "Well, she seemed all right. I came in this morning, what's wrong with her?" And he said, that she'd been arguing with him about wasting her money.
His behaviour following on from that was by any standards extraordinary. He made no attempt to comfort his mother or to move her. He actually asked the maid to come out of the room with him because he seemed to be feeling uncomfortable. And he rang the police rather than medical aid or anything else. And the police duly came, as did medical people, and she was taken off to hospital.
Shortly afterwards, two police officers did arrive, officers called Middlemas and Izzard. And when they arrived, they wanted to know what had happened, and young Merritt told them that his mother had shot herself.
Bertha was taken to Edinburgh Royal Infirmary in a serious condition. Donald visited the hospital briefly around midday. Meanwhile, the police investigation was quickly turning into a shambles.
Was it likely that his mum, in pulling papers out from a drawer, would discover or not realise, that there was a pistol in among them and put the pistol to her head and pull the trigger? I think it's just totally ridiculous.
The officers couldn't even say for certain where the gun was. Middlemas said he picked it up, but he couldn't say if he picked it up from the floor or from the bureau. And Izzard said that Middlemas had picked it up off the floor. The evidence before that had been from Mrs. Sutherland that when she went into the room in the morning, the gun had been on the corner of the bureau.
The police investigation was very poorly handled. They were far too quick to accept Donald Merritt's story of his mother having shot herself, either deliberately or accidentally.
While his mother lay dying, young, dear Donnie seemed carefree.
What did her loving, caring son do? He hopped along to the Dunedin Palais de Dance. He booked out Betty Christie for the afternoon and took her off on a motorbike which he'd bought using one of his mother's forged cheques to South Queensferry.
Merritt continued to keep company with women at the dance hall and spent little time at home or at the infirmary.
Also, during the time that his mother was lying on her deathbed, he continued to forge cheques, quite unashamedly. And so it went on to Merry Dance.
In those days, attempted suicide was a criminal offence. So she was put into a locked ward where the windows were barred, and she was kept there awaiting. She was effectively detained because the police had formulated a charge against her of attempted suicide and informed the hospital that the police had to be informed if she recovered and she was being released.
Here's this poor woman. She's done everything she can for her son. She ends up shot in the head and about to be jailed.
Bertha's sister and brother-in-law, a Mr. and Mrs. Penn, travelled up to Edinburgh. Bertha wanted them to look after young Merritt, but Mrs. Penn was reluctant to do so.
She couldn't understand what had happened to her, and people were warned going in to see her not to tell her what had happened to her or what kind of injury she had or what had caused her injury.
2 police officers said that Rita Sutherland told them that Merritt had run into the kitchen, saying his mother had shot herself. But this flew in the face of what the servant said to another policeman.
According to him, she told him she had been in the kitchen, she heard a shot and ran out of the kitchen and saw Mrs. Merritt falling off her chair and the gun falling from her hand.
Sutherland's version of events changed time and again. At that stage, the police did not question Donald Merritt any further about the fact that he had recently bought a handgun. He had also bought 50 gun cartridges in Edinburgh. Now Merritt started to insist that he had made the purchases to hunt rabbits on the east coast.
And the other remarkable thing is that if his mother took it from him, why did he not say, "Look, Mum, that gun's loaded, it's dangerous, especially with one up the breach, we'd better take the cartridges out"? He didn't do that. He gave 2 different accounts to Inspector Fleming about the pistol, because Inspector Fleming asked him at one point, "Did your mother know you had this gun?" I said, "No, I don't think she knew I had it." But on another occasion, when he thought things out better, he said, "Oh yes, she knew I had a gun, and the Saturday before that, I was going to go over to the Braids to shoot rabbits, and she took it from me, and there were 5 rounds in the magazine and 1 in the breech."
Bertha's sister, Mrs. Penn, and her husband were now deeply suspicious, but young Donald carried on partying and spending freely.
The total amount, in fact, that Donald took from his mother's account was nearly £500 in old values. That's the equivalent of around £20,000 now. It's a vast sum.
On the 27th of March, he presented his last forged cheque from his mother's passbook. Several days later, Inspector Fleming visited Buckingham Terrace again. For the first time, Merritt was interrogated, a fortnight after the incident.
Now, the reason Inspector Fleming came back to see him was that among the other haphazard management, if you can call it that, the police had made of the case to begin with, they hadn't even looked for the spent cartridge case. And this was found by Mrs. Merritt's sister, who was a Mrs. Penn, who had come up to see her in the flat, and the police were called.
They discovered the cartridge lying 7 feet from where Bertha had fallen. She remained critically ill.
His mother had regained consciousness, but there was considerable concern over her condition. Staff at the hospital were naturally asking what had happened. Throughout her stay in hospital, Bertha could only say, "I don't know, I can't remember, I heard a noise, I don't know what happened."
Later on, she contracted a meningitis from an infection that followed on a wound, and the infection affected her brain and she became delirious. That was about 4 days later.
2 weeks after the shooting, Bertha Merritt died at the age of 55. Because the official view was that she'd taken her own life, her funeral was kept short. Later that same day, Merritt went out to high tea with a girlfriend from the dance hall.
He continued to haunt the Palais de Danse. In fact, at one stage, he bought a motorbike and went for an extended jaunt to the borders and other places, and even took girlfriends out for meals.
Shortly after that, Donald vamoosed. He went down to England, and he must have thought that's the end of it.
After her death, he decided that he would have to go to London to see a famous detective, and it might have been Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. We're not sure.
Merritt spent the trip in the company of 2 girls, one of whom was underage. On his return to Edinburgh, he was penniless.
The police were persuaded by a number of friends and family of Bertha, look, there's more to this than meets the eye. The accident explanation doesn't hold water. Bertha wasn't the sort of person who would commit suicide. You must look into this more closely.
By now, Merritt was in the care of a public trustee who assessed his mental health. In court, he was declared to be perfectly sane. Today's experts are certain he was a particular kind of psychopath.
Impulse psychopaths like Merritt, they have damage to the frontal cortex, which is the part of the brain that makes us human, where we make moral decisions and take our cues from other people as well. There's damage there, but there's damage in another part of the brain, which is an ancient part of the brain, the amygdala and the hippocampus. Now, these are the parts of the brain that enable us to experience what's known as fear conditioning. In Merritt's case, though, we have the unfolding of this condition throughout a lifetime, and the chaos it brings, and the fearlessness, and the seizing any opportunity for self-gratification that it means. And it's quite extraordinary.
Handwriting experts were brought in to study the cheques that had been presented by Merritt.
It could be seen that what had happened was that the signature had been copied onto a cheque using carbon paper and then painted over, as they call it, or written over with a pen. But you could see the 2 signatures when you looked closely, and you could see that the forged signature was halting and not fluent.
It can't have been done randomly. If you sign your name 10 or 20 times, it's odds on there'll be differences in the signature. There are also traces behind the signature of carbon copying.
A lot of the cheques that were queried were actually fakes, they were forgeries. It couldn't be said that they were forged by him, and he was never charged with forging them, but he was charged with uttering them. And uttering means presenting as genuine documents that you know to be false.
Merritt was no longer welcome at Edinburgh University, and the Procurator Fiscal of Midlothian had begun to re-examine the death of Bertha Merritt. In December 1926, 9 months after the shooting of his mother, young Donald was arrested under suspicion of murder.
He began to show other aspects of the kind of personality he was. For example, he was very concerned to give a studious, mature appearance to the court, and actually wore glasses, which he didn't need. And he was also very, very cool. He wasn't ruffled at all by the court process. He was quite at ease.
The trial began on the 1st of February 1927 at the High Court in Edinburgh. The presiding judge was the Lord Justice Clerk, Lord Alness. From the start, it seemed clear that shoddy police work had resulted in a very thin case being built against young Merritt.
The prosecution was frankly very, very badly done. It was very, very unclear as to just what the evidence various people were giving was.
Merritt stood at the bar, indicted with the murder of his mother and of uttering false cheques. He did not give evidence in court.
I think he's very, very fortunate that he did not give evidence, and I think he was very well advised by his defence team. If they advised him not to give evidence, surely they must have. Because had he given evidence, I've no doubt that Mr. Watson, the Lord Advocate, would have flayed him alive.
Was the gunshot homicidal, suicidal or accidental? Sir Bernard Spilsbury, honorary pathologist to the Home Office, was called for the defence.
Spilsbury had a worldwide reputation. He was the man who trapped, for example, Dr. Crippen. Spilsbury said he too had conducted tests and was absolutely adamant that Bertha, the wound was self-inflicted. There was no way Donald had shot his mother.
Rita Sutherland was cross-examined thoroughly. It made little difference to the Crown.
Rita Sutherland had changed her story time after time. She was hopelessly confused. They called in handwriting experts. Yes, they could confirm that the signatures on the cheque were forged. But was that a motive for murder?
The jury weren't out for an hour. They were less than an hour, but they declined to find him not guilty, and they found the charge against him not proven. So none of them thought he was not guilty. It might in some ways be a pity, because he was in fact convicted of the charge of uttering and sentenced to 12 months imprisonment.
People going into that court were convinced Donald Merritt had shot his mother. The prosecution simply didn't prove that fact. As a result, he got away with murder, and it may be that led him to think, I got away with it once, I can get away with it again.
This was a matricide. Usually it's due to some very deep bond, usually a codependency, that is threatening to be broken. Things are going badly wrong. And it's under these circumstances of very high emotion that happens. Now, in the case of Merritt, there was no emotion. That's not what happened. He, I'm fairly sure, reacted. He had a gun, his mother was annoying him, and he shot her.
Merritt was described in court as a bored spectator of some tedious business, rather than a lad on trial for his life.
He was actually driven away from the High Court to the cheers and waves of a large crowd of women who'd gathered outside, many of them still wearing their dancing dresses from the Dunedin.
In Sawton Prison in Edinburgh, he boasted to cellmates of the murder charge he'd wriggled free from. His high intelligence and literacy also meant that he was given the softest jobs. Throughout his year's sentence, he received letters and visits from an old friend of his mother's, a colourful character called Mary Bonner. When he was released, she invited him to stay with her family in Hastings.
My own hypothesis is that she was attracted to him, or found him very engaging, maybe even as a son, rather than as a prospective partner, but we'll never know what the truth of that was. And Mary Bonner actually took him in and offered him a home.
Nothing much is known of Mary Bonner's husband, who called himself Baron Menzies. The middle-aged couple claimed to be wealthy Highland aristocracy. They had a 17-year-old daughter, Vera.
Vera was entranced by this young man with experience of the world. She fell for him. Within days of moving in, he seduced her. They ran off to Scotland.
At first, the young couple struggled financially, but with perfect timing, Donald Merritt was soon given the chance to start afresh in style.
And luckily for him, his grandfather died and left him £50,000, which in those days was a king's ransom.
With his wife Vera, Merritt moved to Portsmouth and began to work his way through the sizable inheritance.
He buys a large country house and begins to play the Lord of the Manor, throwing parties and behaving in a very grandiose manner. Big cars, anything that money could buy was being bought.
They bought a yacht, which they turned into a casino. They went round the Mediterranean in it. They had champagne parties. They had celebrity visitors. There were politicians. People clamoured to be invited onto this yacht.
They adopt 2 children, a 5-year-old boy and a 2-year-old girl, and he appears to dote on them.
How was he able to adopt? Quite simply this: he changed his name from Merritt to Ronald Chesney. These days, that would have stopped him immediately from having any access to children. In those days, it didn't.
Ronald Chesney was to prove just as criminally daring and outrageous as Donald Merritt.
At that juncture, something that's going to be of huge significance in his life happens, which is that he begins to fall in with naval types in Portsmouth. And he really likes the way these guys present themselves. So he decides to copy them, grows a beard, gets an earring put in one ear, and assumes the look of a pirate. But what he actually does is he takes to the water in boats and begins to smuggle.
Donald was, in a sense, born to be in the Navy. He had the appearance of a pirate, the big, bushy beard. He was a very powerful figure. He was a very impressive figure. He was mainly a fraudster. He got into smuggling. Come the outbreak of the war, because he had been conscripted at one stage into the Navy, he rejoined the Navy, where his personality seemed to change completely. He was actually something of a war hero.
He rose quickly through the ranks, eventually becoming lieutenant commander in charge of a gunboat supplying the army in North Africa. But it didn't see an end to his criminal activities. With his love of fast cars, free spending and womanizing, Europe in wartime offered Donald Merritt more opportunities than ever before, and the black market proved irresistible.
He was a sort of an Arthur Daly character of the naval world. If you wanted anything, you went to Donald to get it. If you wanted petrol, you got it from Donald. If you wanted cigarettes, he got them for you. If you wanted anything, he could get his hands on it somehow, even if that meant breaking the law.
He was into the black market in a big way in the north of Germany and in France. In fact, he served a couple of prison sentences for smuggling in France.
For someone like Merritt, who doesn't learn from experience, he didn't learn from being imprisoned for forging checks in the first place, because that's why he was imprisoned in the second place. Absolutely classic behaviour.
After a spell in a prisoner of war camp in Benghazi, Merritt drew up a complicated marital agreement for Vera. It allowed her to live off the interest on a sum of insurance money that would be payable to him in the event of her death.
He continued to write to Vera, she continued to write to him very lovingly, and he was womanizing. He would, anything that moved, he would chase, apparently.
After peace was declared, Merritt remained in Europe. He ended up in a small town near Hamburg, where he was tasked with running a barracks. It lacked the glamour and excitement of his war years, but in a broken Germany, once again he found an opportunity to exploit.
The people of Germany were in dire straits. They had nothing. Most had no homes. They were desperate for money to buy food, to buy clothing, to buy life, really. What did they do? A lot of the women cashed in their rings, they cashed in their jewellery, their ornaments, their most prized possessions. There were men like Donald Merritt around to take advantage of that.
In November 1945, he met Gerda Schaller, who was 15 years his junior. She had escaped from capture by Russian soldiers and sought refuge in the barracks run by Merritt. He immediately took her in and offered her work.
He must have taken a fancy to her. She was a young, very attractive woman, and very soon she fell madly in love with him. They became lovers. She lived with him in the quarters, which was against all regulations, and she very, very soon became his confederate and involved in all of everything he was doing.
And he used her, basically. She was always there for him. He was never really there for her. But she was loyal to him, loyal to him just like his mother was, just like, in a sense, Vera was.
Ich fühl den Rhythmus des Dschungels.
Merritt lavished Gerda with gifts. They drove around Europe in a stolen Porsche before he was eventually court-martialed for stealing naval property. He served 4 months in Wormwood Scrubs. On his release, he demanded a divorce from Vera.
When Merritt separated from Vera, he did give her £8,500. It's quite a lot of money. And she and her mother set up a nursing home for genteel people in London.
He would visit there, and by that time Vera was drinking rather heavily. He would bring her a bottle of gin, and they would go to the cinema sometimes. They would go out for a meal. They were often on very good terms. He's becoming known as someone who's wanted or not wanted in many countries. He's either wanted to be put on trial, or people won't allow him into countries because they know that he's an undesirable person.
Ultimately, he ran out of money.
It was a far cry from his youth in Edinburgh. Then a wealthy young man, he had freedom, charm and the world at his feet. As the net closed in on Donald Merritt, it seems the past began to haunt him. It's thought he confessed to Gerda that he had murdered his mother in Edinburgh. Now aged 46 and on the run, Merritt knew his only means to cash lay through Vera. She had the money he had given her, and there was also the life insurance policy. Maybe he knew he had to get rid of her, but it seems he overlooked her constant companion, her mother, Lady Menzies. The woman ran the old people's home together and kept to a strict routine. Merritt headed across the Channel in disguise.
Donald came back to England, knocked on the door of the old people's home at Ealing one February morning in 1954 and said to Vera, "I want back the £8,400 I gave you." She was having none of it.
Merritt resorted to a murderous plan. Later that evening, when the elderly residents were in bed, he returned.
His plan was based on the Baths murders, where this man had murdered, I think, 3 women by drowning them, getting them very drunk and then drowning them in the bath. And that was his plot, and that's what he set about doing.
He was about to make his getaway when he was spotted by Vera's mother, Lady Menzies.
The alarm was raised the following morning when neither of the women appeared for breakfast. Police found Vera's room locked, retrieved the key, and discovered her body.
There was Vera drowned in the bath. So then they set about searching the house, and they found Lady Menzies, Mary Bonner, and it became clear that she'd been heavily assaulted with a coffee pot, which had staved her skull in. Basically, she was, very badly injured and dead.
Despite her age, she bravely took him on. He smashed her over the head with a coffee pot. He then strangled her. In her fight for survival, she scratched his forearms quite severely.
He knew the game was up, and he came to a conclusion, quite dispassionately, as people like him do, that the game was up and that the best thing to do was to get out of there, and he decided to kill himself.
Merritt fled back to Germany, taking with him the few stolen items he had left.
Here was a man in a Germany bereft of wealth, bereft of comfort, bereft of hope, wandering around with his pockets filled with diamonds, with gold rings, with jewellery. That was Donald Merritt, Jekyll and Hyde.
5 days after the murders of his wife and mother-in-law, Donald Merritt's body was found in woodland outside Cologne. He'd been shot in the head.
But the fact remains that nobody can actually say whether he did shoot himself. Just as the mystery remains about what happened to his mum, there is a mystery remaining as to what happened to John Donald Merritt. There's an odd twist to this story, and it's this. Ronald Chesney, or Donald Merritt, whichever you want to call him, remains in situ, in a way, in England. The police in Germany hacked off his forearms, sent them to the police in London who were investigating the double murder of Vera and her mother, and they are still there, pickled in jars in the Police Black Museum in London.